Today is a sermon called Samson's Dilemma. Now, Samson got himself in several dilemmas. We pretty much, I think, at least myself, in the children's stories, we think about a story of Samson and who? Delilah. But come to find out, Samson is about a lot more than just this story of Delilah. It actually takes up 4 chapters of the book of Judges. Now, the book of Judges is kind of like a history lesson. It tells us about the time prior to when the first kings came about in Israel. It tells about the judges of the time. And now, judges are not what we think of as judges who sit on a throne or talk about legal things. Judges, in this sense, were heroic people. They were the people that people of Israel looked up to. They had won military battles or something like that. People like Gideon, who rescued the Israelites from the Midianites. People like Deborah and other heroic military leaders. But Samson's a little bit different case. He's maybe the most peculiar of all the judges. He didn't really go into battle, leading people into battle. He didn't go in and have these great military victories. But he was a judge nonetheless. And he was created, you might say, by God to be a judge. God knew ahead of time. And we're going to talk about his life. I'm going to skim over in a few readings the 4 chapters. We're not going to read all 4 chapters, obviously, but I'm going to skim over them, and we're going to look at the choices that he made, the poor choices, and we're going to look at the consequences of these choices and see if maybe it can help us keep from making poor choices as well. Well, the story begins basically with the birth, obviously, but before Samson's even born, the angel of the Lord comes to the wife of a man named Manoah, and this is what he says. This comes from chapter 13, Judges 13. This is one verse, verse 5. It says, "You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." Now, a couple things let's take note of here. First of all, he will be dedicated as a Nazirite. Nazirite is someone who is set apart for a certain purpose for God. It can be as little as 30 days or as much as a whole person's life. And in Samson's case, it was his whole life. A lot of people believe, probably, most likely, John the Baptist was a Nazirite. He had dedicated himself to a certain lifestyle and dedicated his life. And the thing about a Nazirite is it doesn't really say it here, but if we go back to the book of Numbers, we find out there are some restrictions on Nazirites. Why these particular restrictions, I'm not 100% sure, but God set these restrictions down in the book of Numbers. If someone is set apart as a Nazirite, set apart for some kind of work for God, there are 3 things this person cannot do. Number 1, this person cannot eat or drink of anything that comes from grapes. No wine, no grapes, no raisins, no grape juice, no nothing. They can't partake of anything that has anything to do with grapes, okay? Number 2, they cannot touch any dead person or dead animal. No dead, they can't even be close to. Even if it's a mother or father, they can't come and be near or touch a dead body, okay? I guess to help the cleanliness or the holiness of the person. And then finally, a Nazirite must, for the time that they are a Nazirite, and in case of your whole life, for your whole life, you cannot cut your hair. So your hair would continuously grow as long as this time lasts. A Nazirite will never cut their hair. So these are the 3 restrictions of a Nazirite, of somebody who is set apart by God or sets themselves apart for God and becomes a Nazirite. Now, we're going to find out that even though Samson is set apart by God, even before he's born, he's going to make some decisions that's going to go against these things. And as a matter of fact, I want to read this very last sentence. It says, he will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. Hear that again. Didn't say he will rescue. The other judges, they come into play and they rescue Israel from their the enemies, whether it's the Midianites or the Amalekites or the Thisakite or that Asite or whatever. You know, the Philistines now are the enemies, and they're the ones have conquered. They're the ones who control. Samson's not going to conquer them. I believe because of his poor choices in life, that's why he cannot do it, and he will not do it. He'll never be a great military leader like others in the book of Judges, because he's going to make some poor choices. Now, God already knows this, and that's why God says he will begin. He won't totally rescue you, but he will begin to rescue you from the Philistines. So let's go on and talk. Let's get into the story of Samson. We're going to skip over to chapter 14, read the first 9 verses here. One day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, "A young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me." His father and mother objected. "Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you could marry?" they asked. "Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife?" But Samson told his father, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." Doesn't sound like love. Sounds more like lust. But anyway, verse 4. His father and mother didn't realize the Lord was at work in this, creating an opportunity to work against the Philistines who ruled over Israel at that time. As Samson and his parents were going down to Timnah, a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. And he did it as easily as if it were a young goat. But he didn't tell his father or mother about it. When Samson arrived in Timnah, he talked to the woman and was very pleased with her. Later, when he returned to Timnah for the wedding, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion. And he found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them he had taken the honey from the carcass of a lion. All right, we can start to get a sense of the kinds of decisions or the choices that Samson makes. First of all, he doesn't go within the family of Israelite, the children of Israel. He doesn't go there to get his wife. And what's wrong with this? God tells the Israelites, because he doesn't want them to follow the ways of the pagan people, he tells them, don't intermarry. But the first thing he does is he finds a woman that looks good to him, a pagan Philistine. He goes and says, that's who I want. And he wants to intermarry with the Philistines. Now, the Bible does say that the mother and father, they're upset with this, right? They object to this. God knows what's going to happen. So they didn't realize God was going to be at work at this. I don't think that God chose to say, okay, I want you to go get this Philistine woman. I think it's more like Romans 8:28. Y'all know what that says? God can work in all things. God works good in all things. And I think that's what's happening. He knows he's going to choose this Philistine woman. He's about to work some good in it. He's going to work Samson into being a thorn in the Philistine side. But the second decision he makes is, you remember the thing I said about dead people or dead bodies? Nazarites can't touch or be around a dead body. What does he do? He goes to this lion that he's killed. And he reaches in to the carcass and gets the honey out. These are choices that he makes. He knows right from wrong. We have to believe that he was told at some time by his mom and dad, hey, you're a Nazarite. You can't do this. You can't do that. He knows he's not supposed to intermarry, but he chooses to do those anyway. Well, let me paraphrase the upcoming events, okay? Just go ahead and share with you what happens next. First of all, during the wedding feast, it's a week-long time, and he makes a wager. He chooses to gamble with a bunch of Philistine men. There's 30 men. And the wager is basically, if you win, you give me 30 sets of royal clothes, expensive clothing. If I win, I'll give you 30 sets. Well, he's got a riddle, he tells them. He knows they can't figure it out, and they can't figure it out. But finally, they coerce his wife into getting the answer for him. They coerce his wife and basically tell her, if she doesn't, that they're going to kill her and her family. Well, So they get the answer. He gives it to his wife. He chooses to give the answer to his wife, and they get it. Now, how does he repay? How does he repay them? He doesn't kill them. He goes into a neighboring town, to a neighboring Philistine town, and he kills 30 other Philistines to take their clothes from them. That's murder. Now, granted, the Philistines are the enemies. Granted, if God had said, go destroy the town, that would have been one thing. But God didn't do that. Why did he go and kill these? Because he had wagered. He couldn't pay his bet, and he was angered. He was angered by what had happened. So these poor decisions have brought out anger in him and murderous, acts. And then things go by. Basically, this doesn't work out with his wife. In a roundabout story, the Philistines actually kill his wife and her father, and then he kills a bunch of Philistines. It's a bloody thing here. This is what God is saying. Samson is a thorn in the Philistines' side. But the next time we see the next choice in a woman that Samson's going to make is a prostitute. All right, here we go with his choices again. He chooses to sleep with a prostitute. He's in this town, and the Philistines find out he is sleeping with her. They go outside the gates. Now, in this time, they would have a wall around the city. They close the gate so that nobody can come in and attack them at night. And it would be locked up tight. So they're sitting outside the gate, and they're going to get him at first light when he comes out. Or at least they think so. He wakes up at midnight. And he goes, and by the strength of the Lord, with this huge strength. Now, he can't unlock the gates, but what he can do is he can just tear the gate open. I mean, these are huge, huge gates. And he rips the gates apart and carries them away. And he escapes. But he wouldn't have had to do that if he hadn't made the choice to go into this town where the Philistines were and sleep with this prostitute. Now, finally, we get to the person that we all know. This is his third female choice. And her name is Delilah. That's right. Let's hear about Delilah. This comes from chapter 16. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "Entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong, and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes you so strong, and what would take to tie you up securely." Now, if you remember your old, children's story or Bible study or Sunday school class stories, Samson, he doesn't tell her right off, and she gets upset or angry. First of all, he's chosen a woman that's going to turn on him. And Delilah does turn, because when he finally does give in to her, he tells her that the way that he can lose his strength is what? Cutting his hair. Another decision made that's a poor choice. To tell his secret. Finally, she gets the answer from him. They cut his hair, which cannot happen with a Nazarite, remember? Hair can't be cut. He loses his strength because of yet another poor decision. They come, they bind him up because he's got no strength. They gouge out his eyes. They put him into prison. All right? Now, the final story, the final chapter of Samson's life. This comes from 16, beginning with the 23rd verse. The Philistine rulers held a great festival, offering sacrifices and praising their god Dagon. They said, "Our God has given us victory over our enemy Samson." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy to us. The one who killed so many of us, is now in our power." Half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring out Samson so he can amuse us." So he was brought from the prison to amuse them, and they had him stand between the pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the young servant who was leading him by the hand, "Place my hands against the pillars that hold up the temple. I want to rest against them." Now the temple was completely filled with people. All the Philistine rulers were there, and there were about 3,000 men and women